This is actually the best prose advice I think I've read or seen online. Here's why your prose sucks, okay?
I could use this advice.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Tutor Ramble episode. I am one of your hosts, Austin.
And I'm Richard.
And guess what we're doing today, Rich?
Well, I mean, I do know, but how about you tell the audience?
How about I tell the audience?
Yeah.
We are looking over the top 9 best advice from best-selling authors on how to write a beautiful, perfect story.
Now, I'm going to ask the question that people listening and watching at home are saying.
Of course.
Why didn't you go the extra mile and do a little bit more research to get 10? Well, why is it 9?
Let me tell you 2 reasons, Richard. One, I'm generally a lackluster human being. But the second reason beyond that, that's the one you're going to agree with, right?
Yeah, completely.
The second reason being, I'm not here to give you audience, and you, Rich, you've heard all these things. Simple advice like show, don't tell. We've all heard that. We've heard the advice like there's the plotters and there's the pantsers. That typical writing advice. I tried. I looked for advice that was rare. Someone might not have heard of this before, and hopefully this is 9 pieces of advice that you don't just hear every day.
Okay.
And it's really specific. And I broke it down like this. I'm excited about this because I think I constructed this in a way where of the 9 advice, the first 3 are general writing advice. Then 2 of the advice go into plot advice, 2 go into prose, and 2 go into characters. So we hit all different angles. How do you feel about that?
I'm a bit more excited about that. It sounds like it'll be more interesting rather than something everyone's kind of heard before.
That's what I'm going for, and I'm sure you will have your Richard advice could be the 10th advice as well. That's what I figured.
That's always there. Yeah. I mean, whether you like it or not, Richard gives its advice.
Okay. Now, you want to get right into the first advice?
Right before we get into it.
Yes.
If you're interested in supporting us, go ahead and click the link down below for our Patreon down below. We appreciate it a lot. You get to join our exclusive Discord channel where we have monthly book clubs with us and also community-led book clubs. If you want people to talk to about your favorite books, join us. It supports us. It's great.
We also have some writers in there. So hopefully
we do.
This advice for any writers out there, or I think this could be good for readers to see what makes a good story. And I just want to get off to the first piece of advice.
All right.
And I will warn you beforehand, several of these are from Brandon Sanderson. So
yeah, I kind of expected that.
Yeah. As we go throughout, the different advice that I'm going through will be 4 or so of them have clips that we'll watch and we'll show you guys at home, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
So first piece of advice, and I want the Richard take on whether you agree with this or not.
Oh, of course.
First piece of advice is stop writing when you're feeling the momentum. Now, this is from Ernest Hemingway himself.
One I do know.
Very qualified individual. You know this part.
Yes, I do.
This is what Hemingway said. He said, the most important thing I've learned about writing is never write too much at a time. Never pump yourself dry. Leave a little bit for the next day. The main thing is to know when to stop. Don't wait until you've written yourself out when you're still going good and you've come to an interesting place and you know what's going to happen next. That's the time to stop. Then leave it alone. Don't think about it and let your subconscious mind do the work. So he would sometimes just write 300 to 600 words a day. He'd be astounded if he wrote 1,000 to 2,000 a day. And even Pierce Brown, I must mention Pierce Brown, doesn't abide by this rule, but he does use it as a touchstone in his writing. And you can go from here. And why do you think that is good advice if you've heard it before?
Oh, yeah, I've heard it. It's the exact same story from Ernest Hemingway that I was reading about, and how he got over writer's block, or at least prevented it, was it's always hard to start. Like, wake up the next morning and you have to start putting the pen on page again. It's hard to get started. But if you already know where you're starting, you're kind of good to go. So it's like leaving a little bit of fuel in the tank rather than running yourself empty. So he would deliberately stop when he knew what he was going to write next. Like, so he would write even like half the leave a half a paragraph empty, even though he knows what he's going to write. Leave it unwritten, and then the next day he knows exactly where to start. It gets him started going right into it.
I feel like this is advice you and I needed to hear, mainly for life in itself, because your kind of work mode that you do in your life is, let me just look at a Tuesday and say, fuck that Tuesday. That is my work day, and I will do nothing else. and you'll forget to breathe, and then you'll gear yourself until you're dead.
I get obsessive sometimes. It's
just at times.
Yeah, I go, it's all or nothing. I either have the laziest day ever and I can barely feed myself, or it's so productive that I just fall asleep like standing.
And so maybe this isn't just writing advice. This is a life coaching advice.
Yeah, probably. I could see that.
And it's way easier to be a creature of habit when I think this is even something with working out and going to the gym is if you work to like you're doing it until you're working out 5-6 hours and ungodly, like more than Arnold Schwarzenegger. And then you are going to work yourself out so much that you can't work out for a week and be so sore.
I learned that lesson. I learned that lesson the hard way. So basically, I was just starting to work out and went with Austin and tried to follow his routine. And you tried to give me a workout plan. And I pushed myself to the limit of what I could do.
He did a great job.
And the next day, I couldn't walk. I couldn't move my arms above my head. I was just dead. And I couldn't actually go to the gym for at least another week.
To me, you were in actual like labor. It seemed like you were going through it.
It was pain. It was agony. I think there was, thankfully, the one benefit is we had to move our friend.
Yeah.
And I worked out so hard that I couldn't get out of bed.
Yep. So you had a proper excuse.
Yeah, I was literally like laying down and heard the phone ring of a friend, and I barely reached it to like accept the call and put it on speaker. As I'm laying down, I said, "Hey, are you going to help us?" And I said, I can't move. No.
Basically picture a dead goldfish.
Yeah.
That's what you were.
So to prevent that from happening, you leave yourself something the next day to do. Never finish to completion.
Ernest Hemingway, and that's just life advice, writing advice. Don't work yourself to death. Like obviously get it accomplished, but you use your judgment, use your intuition of, okay, if I keep going, I'm not going to be able to write tomorrow or do whatever tomorrow. So I thought that was unique advice because sometimes you just hear, hit this certain word count, hit this certain number, but this was more intuitive. Ready for advice number 2?
Yeah, bring it on.
We're still in the general advice here. This one, we're going to show a clip from the man himself, Brando Sando, the Mando. And this advice is that ideas are cheap. You want to watch this clip?
Fair enough.
Here we go. Ideas are cheap. Brandon Sanderson, take it away.
One thing to get over is the idea that great ideas make a great book. Well, a certain quality of idea is important. However, a great writer can take the most basic ideas and make a brilliant novel out of it. And a terrible writer will take the best ideas from the world and will turn them into something terrible. Okay? Once in a while, there's an idea like, I usually refer to Jurassic Park as one of those ideas I wish I had. Bring back dinosaurs and make a theme park out of them. That is a really great story seed, and some are better than others. But the thing to teach you is ideas should be cheap. You shouldn't have to worry about your ideas. You should not coddle your ideas and treat them as sacrosanct. You shouldn't think, I have this one novel I've been working on for so long, and it's the perfect book, and I need to just get it done, and then everything will be great. Instead, you should be thinking, boy, that book that I've been working on for 10 years, that I started, that is my baby, is such a big millstone hung around me. I should cast that aside, start fresh with something new, write it for a few months, and teach myself to write. And then, once I know how to write, then maybe I can do justice to that magnificent idea that I've been working on for 10 years, that now is just turning out to be, I've been churning and working on it for so long that I've even forgotten how many drafts I've done. This was in one draft and this other thing was in another draft, and I forget that I've taken this out. It gets to be a big mess.
What do you think of that advice?
I think there's a couple authors that I could think of one in particular.
Could you name drop?
Patrick Roth.
Oh.
Needs to pick up on that advice.
Oh.
I'll be honest. He's such a good writer. Like Patrick Rothfuss, no matter what I think about the characters and plot line that I didn't like, as a technical skill, he's a very good writer. I would pick up if he came out with some different book, I'd pick it up in a heartbeat.
He is coming out with a new book. I think it's in the same world.
Oh.
But he just had a live stream the other day.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The other day.
Literally the other day.
Did he announce that he's going to release the Doors of Stone again?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think this advice, the ideas are cheaper, more geared toward that newer writer of trying to, this perfect idea you think you have, but you're not a good writer yet. So think of your favorite series and your favorite books. Wheel of Time for one. Red Rising, it's not your favorite, but think of any book up here. The idea itself, it's kind of just combining 2 or 3 other things that are really cool.
Yeah.
And then just going with it.
Oh, yeah. Execution's far more important than the initial idea. And I think this kind of rolls into common advice you hear is don't let the perfect get in the way of the good. So when you're doing a project and you are trying to aim at perfection, the project never gets done. And so it would be better just to make it good. Right. I know you used to have that problem a bit more so with your chapter 1.
Oh,
right.
I was a chapter 1 rewriter. Yeah.
You're letting the perfect get in the way of the good, where probably be best to just move on when it's acceptable.
I needed to hear that big time because would you say, name any series? Harry Potter. Harry Potter is the most popular and most top-selling novel series of all time, at least fantasy, by far. Yeah. And Harry Potter is just an element of, it's your academia with wizards. And it's your typical, like, it has probably inspirations from Narnia, I'd assume, or just it's your fantasy. You've seen the same kind of tropes and you've seen the same kind of things, and she adds a bit of a new element to it and just runs with it because she was a good writer and made a good story. With anything, with Red Rising is take Hunger Games and add another little, add an element of Ender's Game little bit later on, and boom, Red Rising.
Yeah, I mean, Wheel of Time is effectively
Lord of the Rings,
plus you add gender dynamics into it and politicking.
The ideas aren't crazy.
Yeah, no, I mean, but thing is, it's that initial idea isn't crazy, but as you get going, it starts to get more complex and more, you get all the details later on. Like they find themselves later.
Yes.
But the initial idea itself is not that complex.
Their exceptions don't disprove the rule, but one exception I think is Pure Nessie that we read. That idea is just, that's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's a great idea. It's just right out of the gate, like great idea, great execution, and there's not a lot of room for discovery along the way. It just had to be good from the start.
Yeah. Now, advice number 3. This is the last of the general advice, then we'll get into more specific advice. This one is Charles Dickens says basically get a life. Charles Dickens says he was writing this to some German novelist named Sophie Verena, and this was what he said to her. He said, "You must remember that in all your literary aspiration, and whether thinking or writing, it is indispensably necessary to relieve that wear and tear of the mind by some other exertion that may be wholesomely set against it. Habitually, I have always had, besides great bodily exercise, some mental pursuit of a light kind with which to vary my labors as an author. And I have found the result so salutary that I strongly commend it to be the fair friend in whom I am deeply interested." Isn't he so elegant with that? Like I hardly could read that.
Basically, in 2023's words, touch grass.
Touch grass. Genius. Charles Dickens says, touch grass.
Yeah. Well, I think even further to his point of why it reaped rewards for his writing is when you are writing, you inevitably are bringing in parts of your own life. If you have not lived a life, how the hell are you going to write about anything? You don't know anything. Maybe you know technical skills. Maybe you know sentence structure.
Wasn't Terry Pratchett a reporter or something like that? And so a lot of his books are inspired by the people he's just seen. Yeah. And went from there.
The people that have lived the best lives have the most potential to write the best stories.
Because they have great stories of their own as well.
You look at Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and one of the lines in there that he talks about is he's very thankful that he doesn't consider himself a philosopher. Yeah. He is not, and how he puts it is he's a student of philosophy, but he uses it in a more practical manner. He is very happy and fortunate that he's not constantly sitting there thinking and philosophizing and always thinking about the actions rather than actually doing it, where he puts his theory and he doesn't think about the theory much anymore. He just acts and practice, and it leaves so much anxiety behind.
Right.
And I think to his point, it's, philosophy without practice is pointless. And so it's important to actually do something with what you know.
So he was a student of it, but he wasn't the teacher.
Yeah.
In that regard.
And he just knew, he talked to himself in his writings, he said, yeah, I do not have the temperament to be a philosopher. It bothered him of thinking about stuff that had no real purpose and that actually didn't change anyone's lives. It didn't do anything.
You and Marcus, you have a lot in common. I mean, you are very much a student of mine. A bald. Oh, damn! I could have went with the bald joke.
I don't even know if he's bald. I thought that's where you're going with it. I tried to cut it off at the pass.
You've been primed for all those jokes. I was going a different route, but we'll stick with that.
Okay. He's bald at some point. I mean, hey, he's been in the ground for a lot. He's bald by this point.
Oh, that's sad. Everyone's bald eventually.
Yeah. Well, actually, no. I think hair does stick around for quite a long time.
Oh, we were at the museum where that 10,000-year-old mummy, remember, still had hair.
I don't remember that.
Okay. All right, next one. We're going over plot advice now. This is advice. This is the fourth piece of advice, and these next two will be on the plot. Now, this is great. If you haven't heard a clip like this. This advice is that, okay, I won't even paraphrase this. I'll just say all bad plots have this in common. Okay? And this is the South Park creators. So you already know where this is going. The South Park creators say this is the number one thing that's allowed them to create good plots in South Park. Here's what they have to say.
We've found out this really simple rule that maybe you guys have all heard before, but it took us a long time to learn it. But we can take these beats, which are basically the beats of your outline, and if the words "and then" belong between those beats, you're f***ed, basically. You got something pretty boring. What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word therefore or but, right? So what I'm saying is that you come up with an idea and it's like, okay, this happens, right? And then this happens. No. It should be this happens and therefore this happens. But this happens, therefore this happens. And that, as soon as we are able to, and literally sometimes we'll write it out to make sure we're doing it. We'll have our beats and we'll say, okay, this happened, but then this happens, and that affects this, and that does to that, and that's why you get a show that feels like, okay, this to that, to this to that, but this, here's the complication, to that. And there's so many scripts we read from new writers and things that we see.
God, I see movies.
And
you see movies that you're just watching, and it's like, this happened, and then this happens, and then this happens. That's when you're in a movie just going, what the am I watching this movie for? And just like...
Palpatine somehow returned. Somehow.
Oh, God.
Somehow Palpatine returned. Every bad plot anywhere is just, if you can fill in, this, then this, then this, then this, then this, is a boring, horribly written plot.
That's most Hollywood movies at this point. Honestly, that kind of sums up why I'm bored with most movies we've seen so far.
Oh, I expected you to go on with a rant about Star Wars or...
Oh, no, it's
just in general.
Just all of them. Where I'm even thinking of something like Top Gun Maverick. Top Gun Maverick was good, and it's movie. Simple. Yeah. Like, it's not like it was super complex or anything, but think about like one of the key moments in the story is it's all there for. Like, why is he called in? Because he's the best. And then therefore he teaches a class. Class is not as, like, they're good, but not as good as Maverick. Therefore, he does the mission. And, he does the mission and it fails. Therefore, someone has to help him, the one he trained. Like, it is, like, follows...
Well, the complications. But what happens is gets shot down. And then,
Yeah, exactly. It follows that exactly.
Usually
it's not a bunch of this.
And that's when you're reading your own plot and going over, hey, am I writing a good story? Is this a good story? And it's just a bunch of sequence of events happening.
Yeah.
It's like usually a good sign that, okay, you gotta...
Well, we read that in Neuromancer, where it seems to be at least in Act 2 of that book. That's a lot of it, is something happens, then this happens, then this. I've noticed that sometimes in sci-fi, what you have to read is not exactly the plot details, is the plot on the surface is then this, then this, then this. But then by the end is now confusing because it's like then, therefore. And you're caught off guard of like, wait a minute, hold on. Why did this happen? Right. And then you have to go back and think about it. And you go, okay, yeah, the surface level plot was a bunch of and thens. But in the background, something has been changing, and there's a through line logic of a therefore, and then the ending is kind of surprising.
I'm honestly, most cases with sci-fi, I'm too dumb to understand it.
Everyone's too dumb to understand it.
Thanks for making me feel included.
Yeah,
right.
No, completely understand. If you say like, oh, I completely understand all sci-fi the first time I read it, liar.
Oh no!
Absolute liar.
Or you haven't touched grass like Rich recommended.
Or you haven't touched grass.
It's one of the two. There's no in betweens.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a mental exercise. Sometimes it's just not very well written. That's also the case.
Happens. Yeah.
But I noticed with specifically Neuromancer, the more I thought about it, the more I went.
A lot of and thens. Yeah.
Yes, but also the ending is a therefore. It makes sense by the end if I think about it, but it takes a lot of thought.
Yeah, we don't like that.
No.
None of that here. Ready for advice number 5?
I am.
Cinco.
Cinco de Mayo.
I'm trying to think of other on a dual set. Toss it. That's in. Is that in Korean? Font. Okay, and then un, deux, tres, quatre, cinque. Okay, number 5 is another piece of plot advice. This is from Brandon Sanderson again.
Of course.
And this one I've talked about on this pod before, but I think it's the most critical writing advice ever. All plots need to do this in order to be successful. I will summarize and then get into the more important part of the clip. Mm-hmm. But the 3 Ps, he's made it an alliteration, so it's easier to understand. But all stories have a promise, a progress, and a payoff. Universal. No story does not have that. I think it's safe to say, unless there's an exception, doesn't disprove the rule kind of situation.
There's some weird stories out there.
I want to see if anyone can comment down below a story that doesn't follow this and has a promise, progress, payoff. I'd be curious to see. There's probably something like just a stick figure and it just stands there for 10 seconds. Yeah, there could be something. But this advice essentially means when your reader goes into a book and they're reading that first chapter, or they're starting to get into your tone and so forth, the reader's promised something from the author. The author says, this is the kind of thing that I'm promising you. And all stories typically fail if the promise that the reader expects is then not paid off and what their expectations were. Now, it doesn't mean it's a bad story. It means that reader could have subjectively just read into this going, I mean, most of the things I'm disappointed with. Example for you, Red Rising, book 1. You read the first several chapters of that and were expecting a certain kind of political or space sense.
A little bit of a space opera and drama.
And this is no spoiler, really. It turned into more of a Hunger Games, which was like, oh, I didn't expect this. It was still fine. Yeah. But since it didn't meet the promise you thought it promised, you didn't like it as much. Whereas you told me going into Red Rising that, hey, this is more of this kind of story. So I was going in with my expectations being set. The promise of the book was this. And it paid off with this. So getting into this is exactly what Sanderson, I'll play the clip right now, and he gets specific. This is what the promises are in a book and what you could set. So here you go, Sanderson.
So when plot is going wrong, I think it is usually, at least for me, not understanding these 3 things. People go into a story giving you a certain benefit of the doubt. If they weren't giving it to you, they would not be opening your story. They wouldn't pick that book up and read it. Some of them might be tougher audiences and tougher sells than others, but every one of them has opened that book and started reading. They are offering you something. They're extending their hand to you. In return, what they are wanting you to do is quickly give them some promises about what type of story this is and why it's going to be enjoyable. All right?
That's basically what I said. He's copying me.
Those promises
take
several forms. And they work in different ways. One of the promises you're going to give them is a tone promise. Another promise is generally going to be a genre promise. And usually, your packaging of your story has already made this promise. But it's important to recognize genre is one of these things you are promising them. You're going to give them a promise about the plot. Specifically, the type of progress that's going to come in this story. This is the promise of this. What is going to make you turn the page? And you're usually going to be making some promises about character.
So those are the 4 things, and he goes on with some other. I mean, honestly, after watching this entire pod episode, you should all go watch all of Brandon Sanderson's lecture series if you really want to get into writing or are an aspiring writer. Mm-hmm. They're phenomenal. He has all of his lecture series that he teaches at BYU, all posted on YouTube. So with the promises, he's saying their tone, genre, plot, characters, you get a certain promise. And tone especially, genre especially, going in and, okay, is this more dark, grim, lighthearted, comedic? You can tell with all the best books immediately when you start a Terry Pratchett novel, I'm going to have a fun time. I'm going to sit back and laugh.
Then you have Red Rising.
Yeah.
Started off with On Mars.
Oh!
On Mars, the gravity is not enough for the head to snap, or to snap the neck.
They let their loved ones do it.
They let the loved ones do it.
Yeah. I was going to say you butchered that a little bit, but I couldn't have done it either. I'm bad with quotes.
Here, like, you can just pop in
a voiceover?
You can pop in Kyle's voice, right?
Okay.
Over me.
Okay.
You know, like, there we go.
I'll do that instead.
You're not going to do that. You never do my editing, guy.
No, I don't.
I always ask for editing things, and you never do it.
All right, I'm going to do this instead.
On Mars, there's not much gravity, so you have to pull the feet to break the neck. They let the loved ones do it.
I don't know what I did, but we'll see in post. All right. So go on with that, yeah.
Oh, no. There's so many examples of that. I would say there are plenty of good stories out there that miss the mark on that. And that's probably why. Because there's plenty of series out there where maybe the first book is kind of hard to get into and you just don't see the promise. And it's not really clear. I would say Wheel of Time probably does that really well, where I don't think the first book really sells you on what the tone and promise is.
What?
Yeah.
That's your baby.
Yeah. Okay, look. Wheel of Time is my favorite thing.
Yeah.
However, it has flaws. I can be critical. Like, it has plenty of flaws, plenty of critiques.
Yet
I'm still saying it's my favorite
Your
thing.
poor future child. Like, I love my child. He's the best child ever. But he's a dick. And
exactly.
He really, ages 13 to 27 were not good for him.
Yeah. But you know what? That's called a character journey.
Yeah.
No, I would say there's plenty of moments in the later books which gives you far better indication of what the tone and the genre and what the plot's really going to be. Where the first book very much isn't.
Right.
I think you're even noticing with the third book, like, very different tonal change.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So yeah, most stories fail when that promise is not paid off correctly
or made clear.
For sure. And that is the end of our plot section. But now, advice number 6. This is where we're getting into prose, and this is something that I do in our writing group. But okay, so tip number 6 is, your writing's boring, or if you want to know if your writing is boring, sound it out. Now, this advice is from some authors I haven't heard of, but several authors: Jim Harrison, George Saunders, and Jesse Bell. I haven't heard of those authors, but they were saying that instead of focusing just on the plot, right? Instead of thinking, is my story boring? Like, what's happening? And you think of your writing as in this sequence, and then this sequence, and then this sequence. I shouldn't say and then. A good story should be therefore this sequence, but this sequence therefore. I stumbled right into it.
There you go.
I learned from previously. So instead of thinking what is happening in my story, sit there, look at what you wrote, and sound it out loud. So read your story out loud to yourself, and that will indicate to you where the energy is. Now, this is the specific quote. So George Saunders says, in many drafts, when he can no longer see the work with fresh eyes, this was Jesse Bell. When he can no longer look at it with fresh eyes, he will say sound gives us clues to what's necessary and real. So when you read your own work out loud, there are parts you might skip over. Like if you're kind of skipping over a part, it's not that exciting. You're like, okay, there's probably something here that's wrong. And so you'll find yourself wanting to speak them, and on the stronger parts, you'll be into it and going like, saying each word and having more diction and more clarity, and you'll be more excited and invested in it. That's how you can tell yourself, okay, there's something here, or there's something here that's wrong. What do you think of that advice?
It makes sense, because if you're skipping over something, so often if you're reading something and you're skipping over something, the reason in your head is like, I already know that, moving on.
Yeah.
But in making your own writing, there should never be that type of moment. Like, I already know this. I'm just going to move on. Mm-hmm. Something that I've heard a lot with people who read Tolkien, and one of our friends who reads Stormlight Archive is there were sections that he just skipped over, like completely.
The interludes mainly.
And I mostly blame that on the reader. Like, that's their fault. But that is certainly something of you shouldn't have that feeling. And if you are, maybe it's the wrong story for that person. Mm. So now that's someone taking someone else's work and reading it. And not every book is for every person. So maybe that story doesn't need to be changed. However, if you're the one writing the story and you're skipping over it, parts,
imagine what the reader's going to do.
The book needs to at least appeal to you.
Yeah.
Every part should at least be important and exciting to you, the writer. If you, the writer, aren't that interested, what is the reader supposed to feel?
Yeah. So you're reading out loud going, that guy's me. Yeah. Like you're complaining. So I think that's good advice, especially for the fresh eyes point. If you're writing your story and you're reading it in your head over and over again, sometimes it's hard to find the flaws in it unless you get another, of course, writing groups are very important. You get another fresh set of eyes.
Well, it's the important thing with an editor.
Yeah, exactly.
We're talking about how at the end of the Wheel of Time books, like I think The Great Hunt had a little interview with Robert Jordan himself.
Yep.
He talked about how important his editor and eventual wife was to his whole writing process. Is in his head, he knows what he's talking about. He knows exactly where the character's supposed to go. He thinks this is being interpreted correctly and people understand. Then his wife picks up, reads it, and goes, yeah, that ain't clear at all.
What's going on?
What the hell's going on here?
Divorce. I don't think she said that. But.
No. No, they were very loving couple.
Yes.
But
Harriet, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's important to have that perspective. So reading it out loud to yourself, maybe you can see it a little better. Now, the best solution is still to have someone else read it and see if they understand what you were thinking.
But if you have someone like Rich as a friend who would never read your own work and you only have yourself, this is great advice for someone like me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, why would I waste my time reading your book?
Next piece of advice. This one is also on prose. This is tip number 7 on here's why your prose sucks. Okay?
I could use this advice.
And this is, again, from Brandon Sanderson. This is our... Okay, there's one more Brandon Sanderson after this, but this is our second to last from Sanderson. This is the... I will preface this because he has a whole lecture on this where he goes like 10 minutes into this in detail. I will play the clip toward the end where he says the more important aspect, but I will do my best to explain and preface this video coming in. Okay?
I do want to say that article that came out several months ago where they said Brandon Sanderson is your god.
Yeah.
It's people like us where I kind of get it.
Oh, yeah, totally.
I understand why that's the headline. Like, we were upset at that article.
Obsessive over Sanderson, though.
But I get it. There's a reason they wrote that article. There's a nugget of truth there.
Yeah. His name was what, Jason? Jason's...
I don't remember the guy's name. His name does not deserve to be remembered.
Oh, wow, that's even meaner. That's worse. But yeah, I do praise Sanderson like all the time.
Yeah.
So this is why your prose sucks, okay?
Good.
I have to have a hot topic headline to start this with. This is actually the best prose advice I think I've read or seen online is the concrete versus the abstract. I went over this with you in the past, like off camera and whatnot, but this whole concept, and to get into more detail, is think of prose as a pyramid, where on the very top you have your abstract, and on the very bottom you have your concrete. Now, what do I mean? What does Sanderson mean? And by the way, Sanderson said this was one of the best pieces of advice he got, not from a teacher, but from a fellow student in a class in his grad program. Told him this, which is very neat. So what do I mean by abstract? What does he mean by concrete? Abstracts are words that when I say dog, for example, that's a more abstract word because when I say dog, Rich, you're thinking of a dog, I'm thinking of a dog, the viewer Dave is thinking of a different dog. We could have... Hey, Dave again. So we could be thinking... I could be thinking of a Yorkshire Terrier. You could be thinking of Maltese. They could be thinking of a Golden Retriever. It's more... When you just say dog, we're not grounded in what that is. When you say the word love, like love for what? A friendly love, a romantic love. Like, I love this cupcake. Like, what are you loving about? It's a very abstract word. Now, to ground the reader more into concrete language, and the example that Sanderson uses in his lecture is, imagine you described a dog as a white-furred, whimpering dog bloodied on the side of the road after getting ran over by a car. We all kind of have the same image of that dog, and that brings you more concrete. Now, he says, I'll preface this right before he gets into why going down the scale is good and bad. So going from abstract to concrete, because your entire novel should not be concrete, because that would be a lot of words. And now I'll say that this is Sanderson's advice on when to go into the concrete and what makes good prose.
Now, there's a lesson to be learned here, however. Down is not always better.
As in more concrete.
We talk about in writing this phrase called show, don't tell, right? And it's become a mantra. It's this thing, it's like, anytime anything's wrong in a story, people be like, well, you didn't show enough. You told too much. And they're often right. But show versus tell is not something to hold up as like the absolute gold standard, because almost always showing more and pulling down on the pyramid abstraction requires what?
More words.
More words. And so the more words you spend, the more concrete you can generally make things. Now, if you understand this model well, what you're going to do is you're going to learn how to use those more words to pull yourself down rather than just using words that are meaningless. And you will find, if you actually look at your writing, you will be using a lot of meaningless words. You'll be doing a couple of things. I do this a lot in my first drafts. You will be doing what we call a tell then show. This is where your paragraph starts with like a line kind of explaining that, he was a really nervous person. And then your next line is, he sat at the table tapping his pen against it and moving his foot like this. That is what we call a tell then show. The show is enough. You don't need to have a thesis sentence in your paragraph telling us what you're going to then show us, but we do it a lot because as writers, we're trying to organize our thoughts, and then we go on to the show. You will find these all the time still in published books where the author didn't catch that one and delete it out. You want to learn to delete those out. I have a lot of a word that comes up that is very controversial in this is the word suddenly or abruptly. A lot of writers will say, just don't use that, just make it abrupt or sudden, the thing that's happening. I still tend to prefer using the suddenly because it becomes a marker very well to the reader. But this is why we say get rid of the passive voice. Get rid of too many adverbs. Get rid of too many descriptors that don't actually pull you down on the pyramid of abstraction. And you'll find you're doing this a lot. You're using a lot of veries. He was very mad instead of saying he was irate. Irate is further down than very mad. But very mad uses more words. Anytime you can go down by using fewer words, you're almost always wanting to make that change.
That's the most important piece of advice there. And basically, any time you can go down from abstract to concrete with using fewer words, that is better writing.
It's why I say Terry Pratchett is the best writer.
Yeah, he does this perfectly, right?
Perfect.
Yeah.
That is exactly it. Like, look at these books.
Oh,
like that.
Eric, 20
is a whole book. Look how thin this is. It's effectively a novella. And yet every word's essential. It's incredibly descriptive. It is perfect in that way.
He uses the most concrete words he can, pulls down from abstract to concrete, and keeps you grounded that way.
To be fair, that's also why, trying to remember his name. Name of the Wind guy.
Patrick Ruffus?
Yeah. That's why Patrick Ruffus
You
is
said
a
his
good
name
writer.
this episode.
I know. I'm not good with names.
I
forget your name sometimes.
This is a problem.
I know. My brain is a sieve when it comes to names and dates. But Patrick Ruffus does this exactly.
Yeah.
He uses the perfect words to describe a scene. Now, it's a little bit thick of a book, but for the most part, he does do this. He doesn't use very many varies.
I'd say when we're rating our prose and dialogue, when we come to that, this is an important standard that makes good dialogue, that makes good writing.
Yeah.
And now we're getting into my favorite pieces of advice.
Okay.
Character advice. So this is number 8 on the scale. Remember, we actually have 3 more pieces of advice because you're giving us the 10th one, Richard.
Oh, okay.
So you better start thinking.
I got to think of it.
You got to think.
I'm
giving you
springing
time.
something on me. Okay.
Yeah. But I'm not just pulling it out of nowhere. I'm giving you a couple more tips so you can ruminate on what to say. So this is advice number 8. This is the last one from Sanderson. This is how to write a compelling character. Is very simply this. He says, stop using character archetypes and start using character motivations. And sounds very general, but look at this specific example that kind of really helps explain how Sanderson's able to create incredible characters, right?
Man, he took my piece of advice.
That
was going to be mine.
Damn it. And then
darn it.
Tip number 9 was going to be yours as well.
I know.
So this is what Sanderson said. So when he was asked, how can he create so many characters and yet each of them feels 3-dimensional and fully realized? Sanderson admitted that he struggled early on in his works with this kind of depth. But what he learned in the process of writing these early novels is stop writing people to an archetype and start writing them to a motivation. So for instance, very simple example to think when you're creating characters, instead of saying this character is the wise mentor, therefore he will do wise mentor things. If you just kind of place and think Gandalf, like, okay, wise mentor, he's the wise mentor archetype. Instead, he would just give them a simple pinpoint and a backstory, even if it's a side character. Just do something simple like this. This character lost their previous protege. They delved too far, and their previous protege mimicked them and got themselves killed. And so they are extra hesitant now to do that ever again. That's the difference between saying, pick the wise mentor or give them one thing in their backstory, no matter how simple or complex it could be. So instead of saying wise mentor, say their previous protege died because of them and they pushed them too much. Instantly becomes more of a character. And so he started to ask himself, Sanderson asked himself, if the character wasn't involved in the plot, what would they be doing? What would their life be like? And ask yourself the things they want most, they fear most, and so forth, and what drives your character. So yes, it's good to have, of course, as we read in Save the Cat, you have your character's flaws, wants, and needs, but having a pinpointed thing that happened in their life could really influence the way you think about the character. What do you think about that, Rich?
It seems like a good advice. I mean, I do like the advice from Save the Cat of a character should have wants and then needs. And then ultimately the end of the character journey is it solving its need. And normally that's not what it wants.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense. But to actually carry the character through the story, having a pinpoint example of a moment in their life is probably a good idea.
And even instead of just saying, my character, like, I want money. Instead of saying just, I want money, maybe it's when I was 8 years old, my parents got divorced. And my dad, because they were financially unstable. And my dad, after the divorce, got into depression and committed suicide in the middle of the road. And I saw his bloodied corpse spray across windshield wipers everywhere. And then when I got home, my mother, who was at a whorehouse just to put food on the table, was telling me, get your ass to school. Why are you here? And I'm telling her, Daddy died. What do you mean, Mom? As several men are walking in and out of the house. And I'm crying tears going, Mom, what do I do? What do I do, Mom?
I'm so impressed how you're able to open up on the internet about your life.
Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry. They're great. I have great parents. But that, instead of saying I want money, no, that's why I want to be financially stable.
Yeah.
Like, you have a backstory to explain the character's motivations.
That's good advice.
Sorry, Mom and Dad. Okay. The very last, do you want to add anything to that?
Your mom and dad can't hear you.
They don't watch my stuff. They don't watch this.
Your dad's dead. He was at the side of the road.
Oh my God.
That's what I was getting at. You were being honest.
That's so brutal. Yeah. And ironically, my dad's name's Dave. So every time we talk to...
Hey, Dave.
Oh my God, now it's even more strange. Yeah. It's like we're talking to... Oh, okay. My dad's great. He's still around.
I was wondering, why'd you look up?
I was going with a joke, Richard.
No, I meant like... That's where you think you went?
Oh, you bastard. You know what? You're lucky. I know your dad too well. I can't make those jokes with you. And your mother. It's strange because... damn you. Okay. This is the second to last piece of advice. Wait for Richard's advice, of course. Mm-hmm. This 9th piece of advice is how to write compelling characters from M.L. Wang. Mm-hmm. M.L. Wang wrote Sword of Kagan. And since our Sword of Kagan episode, by the way, I've upped my rating of that book tremendously. The characters are nearly a 10. I can't stop thinking about those characters. They've impacted me in several ways. So, of course, when we're looking for advice from characters, I had to go to Emma Wang for this. And she, like Sanderson, likes using alliteration. She said, follow the 3 Ds, okay? The 3 Ds is how she writes a compelling character, and she builds a character from the inside out. And those are the day at work, the detractor, and the dragon. That's the 3 Ds. Now, what do each of those mean? The day at work test that she does with her characters is take your character through a day of doing what they do best, be it baking, espionage, party planning, conflict moderation, arson, sports, whatever. What is their process? How do they feel about what they're doing? Do they take pride in it, shame, satisfaction? Walk through it with them and figure it out. Take a day at the office with them. Secondly, the detractor. The detractor is drop your character into an argument with someone who questions their views or way of life. And by the way, this would be great with Rich. Rich always does that with me. So the detractor is put the character with Richard. That's Emma Wang's advice. So this is for maximum effectiveness. The detractor must be your character's intellectual equal. Okay, in that case, no, because you're inferior, or superior. Oh, damn it. Okay. So no easily dismantled straw men are allowed. This is the quickest way to figure out not only the finer points of your character's ideology, but also how they deal with that conflict. How secure are they in their views? How willing are they to defer to authority? Are they aggressive in an argument? Calm, snide? Do they project? Are they quick to question themselves? Willing to question themselves at all? How articulate are they? Do they stay that articulate when they're frustrated? So you can find out a lot about a person when you get into an argument with them. Mm-hmm. It's great. And the last one is the dragon. And by dragon here, she means this monstrous antagonistic force that might appear in any story. That's what she means by dragon. So put your character in this high stress, high stakes situation, dangle them off a cliff, dump them off, have them be dumped the day before prom, drop a car on their family, and let them deal with it. This scenario can be lifted from a potential climax of your story or somewhere else like the Titanic, the Hunger Games, or a sitcom, whatever kind of pressure feels relevant to the questions you're trying to answer about the character. And what Emma Wang does is she usually attempts to plan action climaxes early in the character development process so she can figure out where their holes are. So Emma Wang goes really specific into this where she looks what's my character like in a casual day of work? What are they like in an argument? And what are they like in a high stressful situation? And if you put them in those 3 scenarios, that does encompass a lot of a person and a personality.
And then you can backfill all the times in between.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm trying to think. Joe Abercrombie, I think, does that perfectly. Because I think each character in the First Law series, you see the first chapter is basically a day in their life. You get that.
As most first chapters are, right?
As most first chapters are. But then kind of really quickly on, you're then given each one of them have to go through an argument. Each of them are confronted with someone and have an actual argument with someone about their ideology. And then later on, they all have that dragon moment.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, he does that exceptionally well.
I think that's great advice. And I think the best advice of all is advice number 10 coming from you, Richard. What'd you come up with? What is your advice to fellow writers out there?
If you were listening during this lesson, I actually already gave the advice.
What's the advice, Rich?
I stuck it in there. Comment down below if you think you already know what advice I gave. A little Easter egg, slipped it in there.
Okay.
What do you think? Because I did already say it.
You did?
Yep. While we were talking.
Not to read my book? My dad's dead, but he's not? Well, you said a lot of things this episode, Rich.
Don't let the perfect be in the way of the good.
Okay, you did say that.
Ultimately, it's better to just keep going with something. If it isn't working for you, that's fine. You don't feel like the need to write the perfect novel. And Sanderson is probably the best example of, he wrote 16 books or 12 or 16 books before he ever got published.
I think it was 13, and Elantris was his first published. I think it was like the 6th or 7th he wrote.
Yeah,
but he'd already written 13 novels.
Yeah, exactly.
Until I got picked up.
So don't let perfect get in the way of the good.
Precisely.
And that, honestly, that applies to, I think, probably good life advice in general.
Most of these are just good life advice. Mm-hmm. Like, if you want to be a better person, just face a dragon, face an argument, face a day in the life. Well,
in all honesty, you become more clear about your own opinions when you have an argument about them.
Yeah.
That's why I enjoy arguing with people, even if, I'm not sure if I'm right. I just like taking contrary opinions. Even if I'm not
figuring out, you always learn something.
Exactly.
If you kind of nod your head the whole time, you'll find out a lot less.
Especially if if I'm in an argument with someone and I start being swayed to their side, I'm starting to agree with them. Mm-hmm. I won't just nod along and say, yes, I will start fighting for my side a little harder. The reason I have a purpose behind it is I'm starting to get swayed. I want to really test it. I want to see how, if I'm going to jump to this side, I want to make sure that they're really right. And so I'll push a little harder. And if pushing harder gets it to fail, then okay, then I'm correct.
That's why you push so hard against me. It makes sense now. This is why you hate my guts.
If it goes through that and I'm still convinced, then look at that. I can change my mind.
Yeah. Interesting way of looking at it.
And then, of course, no man is truly knows what he thinks unless they're tested. The dragon. Everyone says, oh, if I got into that fight, if someone tried to attack me, I would fight him off. You don't know. You have no idea what you would do unless you're actually tested.
Yeah, you could say it as long as you want. Like, oh, I totally.
All the people that say, like, oh, if someone broke into my house, I would, I could attack the robber and I would face them, all the stuff. You have no idea. Maybe you would, but in all honesty, until it happens, you'll never really know. I think we were talking about the difference between a belief and a conviction.
Yes.
A belief is something that you think about yourself.
It's untested.
It's an untested conviction. And a conviction is something that it has seen the test.
Right. For example, a belief in God, right?
Yeah.
You could say you believe in God, but then until a family member of yours dies, what is your reaction? Like you are now tested to go, do you still believe? Are you still praying? Are you still facing and knowing that basically being tested in your religious convictions? Yeah.
The story of Job is God constantly testing
Abraham. Killing your kid. Well, you can have this belief, but I'm testing you now. Like, would you kill your child for God?
They are They are convinced.
One thing you can't say.
They have conviction.
Abraham might be a child killer almost, but he has conviction. That man stands his ground, goes, I believe. So
yeah. So that's, I think, interesting in writing that it applies the same way.
Yeah.
You don't know that character until they are tested with their beliefs. And so it also makes really fun villain characters and makes them pathetic. Of when a character that is so it's always fun with the bully character. They talk all this stuff. They're really mean. They're aggressive. They have all this aggression and they talk a big game. And it's very satisfying is when that bully character is finally faced and runs away. And you see their life and their beliefs as a facade. And so that's fun to read. It's cathartic. But then your hero is tested and comes out the other side, standing behind it. And that's also very satisfying to read. So a good lower villain, you want them to be, the villain you want to be pathetic must fail in that, basically fail in their conviction. Where a respectable villain, one where you're you really enjoy reading them and they're just as fun as the hero, they stand by their convictions.
A perfect example of that is in Red Rising. No spoilers, I'm just going to name two characters, Pliny versus the Jackal.
Perfect.
And in book one, I'm not going to say the specific scene because I don't want, but the scene you love the most about the Jackal in book one.
Yeah.
Stuck to his convictions.
Yeah.
All the way through.
It made him a respectable villain.
And you understood him as a person at that point. So the action made you understand his villainy and know who he truly is when the cards are on the line. His cards are on the line. That's not the analogy. What's the word I was looking for?
His life is on the line. The cards are on the table.
Cards were on the table. That's what I was looking for. So, all right.
Combine those two together.
So I think we're about done here.
The most important piece of advice was actually the very first one. Touch grass.
Touch grass, kids and adults. Most of you, actually, our demographics more like 23 to 27.
That's surprising.
Goes up to 35.
I guess it's not surprising because most people watch people in their age range. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's not surprising.
But also, I just think YouTube in general is the younger audience platform.
Yeah, usually, but I mean, it's book space, it's fantasy, but it's adult fantasy as well.
Fair enough.
So we could just talk about. I mean, we could keep talking.
Honestly, we should just do an offshoot channel of a toy unboxing channel. And we'll just get all the 8-year-olds.
Actually, we do have an unboxing of books that were sent to us coming soon.
Yeah, so there we go. Cool. We'll get the young audience then.
Rich, I enjoy talking.
Young people like unboxing stuff.
Yeah, you want to keep talking? Is this...
I don't think that's in my contract. I will only talk to you the contractual limited agreement. Beyond that, no.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Da 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 da.